Wednesday, September 29th, 1926. The West has more cowboys than ever. By Donald Hugh. The French people think that all Americans are cowboys. The British are of the opinion that the ordinary American west of New York is a tall, handsome person who wears chaps and a magnificent hat. New Yorkers are quite positive that every able-bodied man the other side of Omaha is a cowpuncher and that he carries 2 revolvers to prove it. But the average American above the age of 14 is convinced that the cowboy faded out of everything but the movies when the Old West passed, and that he is of purely academic interest as a relic of a colorful age. Everybody is wrong. The cowboy is neither the dominant American nor the dominant Westerner, but neither is he a museum piece. The discussions about the cowboys, whether they are extinct or not, and whether they still wear chaps or carry guns, are reminiscent of the scientific papers about the carrier pigeon or some other natural order. But the cowboy is not a species of wild animal, like the bison, nor is he an isolated type of humanity, such as a person who believes that the world is flat. As a plain matter of fact, he is an employee on a ranch. Wherever there is a ranch, there are cowboys. Where there are no ranches, presto, there are no cowboys. The cowboy is somewhat like the sailor in this respect. Where there are ships, there are sailors, and always will be. But on the other hand, where there are no ships, there are no sailors. A cowboy is a ranch hand, and his position corresponds to that of a farm hand on a farm. Some ranches, like some farms, have only 1 or 2. Some have 40. The cowboy, however, has been arbitrarily placed in a different category. He has attained to somewhat of an epic figure, and his status has been changed from that of a ranch hand to that of a romantic swashbuckler. The principal job of the legendary cowboy, as every child knows, is to shoot up towns with 6-shooters, to rescue charming maidens, to take part in heterogeneous high adventure, and to lead an all-around quixotic life. His name has been given to every beshapped individual who ever roamed the West. However, we are not concerned in this article with the cowboy of history, nor with the cowboy of the motion pictures or other legends. We are out to discuss the cowboy as an ordinarily mortal, and especially to find out why he is always spoken of in the past tense. There still are cattle ranches in the West. Therefore, there still are cowboys. There are undoubtedly a great many more, 100 times more cowboys in the West today than there were in the hectic days of yore. Therefore, any person who has an idea that the cowboy is a disappearing species is doomed to disappoint. He is increasing, and he will outlast the farmhand because there are no machines to take his place. He goes on to say in his article, since the cowboy of the West is not an independent individual, the history of ranches is the history of their hired hands, the cowboys. The first ranchers operated on a grand scale. They were unhampered by regulations and rules. They summered vast herds in the grassy hills of Montana, and when winter came, they drove these great herds across the prairies to Texas. The whole West was the range in the days of the cattle barons. As the country settled, as home teeters fenced in precious water holes, as sheep, they still call them range maggots, got a foothold as the railroads came and fences disappeared. The herds of the West diminished in size, but they increased in number, and that is exactly what they have been doing ever since. But it was the early regime that provided the adventure and romance enlarged upon and preserved in present-day literature and movie reels. The range was as free as the sky. It was wide open, and because the herds were so large and because they roamed so freely, it was virtually impossible to keep active track of them. Thus grew up 2 classes, The first were rustlers, who cut out stray steers or blocks of steers from the vicinity of the main herds, and even made foraging attacks on the herds themselves. These they disfigured by new brands, burned over the old, or changed the old ones by certain additions. The other class, moving closer to the borderland of legitimacy, picked up stray mavericks or motherless calves and branded them. A maverick was, and to a large extent still is, considered the property of the finder. Thus, most of the cowboys in those days carried revolvers, because the rustlers were sometimes quite bold. But the revolver never was a part of the business equipment of the cowboy, and neither did the cowboys wander around shooting at each other. Not any more than do the citizens of Chicago today. To the average Easterner, a person of the West who dresses in a certain manner is a cowboy. But the dress of a cowboy is not the badge of his trade. It is a practical uniform used by all riders in the West. Just as the small ranchers and the fences and other changes in big open ranges were discouraging the running of big herds, a significant happening put an end to the last hope of a magnificent, roving empire of cattle barons and changed the entire character of the West. The people of the East discovered that they owned the public lands in the West, just as much as the cattlemen did, and through the Forest Service they took them over and began to administer them. A code of rules was drawn up for the use of public range. Each rancher was given a permit to run his stock on the land, and he was allotted a certain general district as his range. Thus a new kind of West, as far as ranching was concerned, was built up. The result is that today it is an empire of small ranches, a republic instead of the old monarchy of the big operators. Each of these ranches must have cowboys, and they always will have cowboys, and the work of the cowboys has, so far, remained virtually the same. Sometimes they are the sons of the ranchers. Again, the size of the herd necessitates the hiring of outsiders. There is nothing particularly romantic or adventurous about the work. During the summer, some of them go into the hills with the herds. The best beef comes from the contended steers, and it is the job of these cowboys, who are really cowherds, to keep the steers together, to move them as gently as possible from one good place to another, to see that they do not have to travel far for water, to keep salt on hand, and in every way to conserve the strength of their charges, so that they may wax fat instead of becoming lean and stringy. Others must keep the corrals in repair, must take care of the horses. When colts are to be broken, they do it. If the ranch owns hay lands, these must be irrigated. The hay must be cut and stacked. On the big ranches, the breaking in of the bronc horses used to be an event of importance, and competition among the cowboys for riding honors ran high. The affair was called a rodeo. It was natural that the cowboys of neighboring ranches would try to outdo the other. From this has come the modern rodeo. The rodeo of today is almost entirely synthetic. Most of the horses are not actually broken at the rodeo, but are trained to buck. Many a favorite bucker at the rodeo does prosaic work. The rest of the year, others are kept by the cowboys just for this event. The dress of the cowboy has changed little since the early days. The reason for this is that all of the trappings familiar to patrons of the motion pictures are not only practical, but necessary. The average cowboy, no matter how poor he is, will never pay less than $75 for a saddle, and the average is closer to $90. Chaps runs from $20 to $100. Chaps are of two general styles: the stovepipe, which is simply a barrel of leather like the leg of a pair of pants, and the bat wing, which snaps around the leg and has a wing which extends far to the rear on the outside. The material may be heavy leather, or it may be leather covered with the skin of the Angora goat, with its long silky wool. This wool, which is strikingly beautiful, usually is left in its natural white, but some is dyed black or in such popular colors as orange, red, yellow, and any combination. The leather chaps may be planed or trimmed with tooled or white designs on black. Some are finished with silver or nickel trimmings. All cowboys wear chaps, and since these things are expensive and most cowboys are poor, there must be a good reason for them. In the cactus, sagebrush, and buckbrush regions of the Southwest, breeches or pants are torn to tatters in a few days without the protection of heavy chaps. Last summer, I rode for a month in this type of territory in Arizona, and as steep, rough trails required some dismounting and walking, I wore very heavy breeches. But at the end of the first day, they were so badly ripped that I had to wear chaps thereafter. Later, I met a Forest Service man who had been riding in breeches for several days, and the breeches were in ribbons and the rider in ill humor. Chaps make riding possible in such regions. The riders do not follow paths or trails. They ride at top speed through the worst kind of brush. In the northern Rockies, there is not so much brush interference, but chaps are necessary there as well. They are warm in cold weather and cool in hot, and their economical side recommends them. Any kind of pants may be worn under chaps. The constant friction against the stirrup leathers would ruin them, even in the absence of outside interference. Furthermore, the chaps take up much of the motion of the horse, thus greatly assisting the rider. Obviously, the plain leather chaps are more popular in the South, the wool ones in the North. High-heeled boots are as much a part of the cowboy's outfit as his saddle is. These boots are narrow-toed, the instep is highly arched and the heels powerful at the base, taper abruptly from the rear to the size of a $50. The Westerner rides his horse hard. He uses ring stirrups and he rides the stirrup in his arch, not on the ball of his foot. He must have a powerful grip on the stirrups, for he does all of his work, riding brush, crossing ravines at full speed, roping animals standing up. Thus he wears boots that fit the job. Cowboys wear blue denim trousers, not overalls, and these are made of the stoutest material and are copper riveted at all points of tension. Oddly enough, one of the striking characteristics of the cowboy's dress is seen only in motion pictures. That is the colored neckerchief. The cowboy is not given to fancy additions that serve no purpose. Visitors from the East, all dressed up in cowboy clothes, can be spotted a mile away by these glorious bits of silk. Although the cowboy has changed little in appearance since the early days, and his job is much the same now as it was then, the growing civilization of the West, the standardization of the American small town by radio, the motion picture, the cheap magazine, and the palace of sweets has had its effect on him. He no longer rolls his own with one hand, for he prefers the factory-made cigarette of a cheap and popular brand. He does not blow into town and shoot up the main street by way of diversion, any more than does the Iowa farmhand dash through town on a plow and throw hunks of sod at the store windows. When the cowhand comes to town, he usually comes in the ranch fiver, and he wears a white collar and a suit of clothes of popular and standardized cut. If he wears any of his working clothes, it is his boots, or his big hat if it is new and clean and presentable. But ordinarily, you couldn't distinguish between these cowboys and the usual Saturday evening visitors to any small town in America.